This meeting is being recorded.
I didn't know they have a little announcement now. All right. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Painter. Dr. Painter received his PharmD, MBA, and PhD from the University of Kentucky. And after receiving his PhD, Dr. Painter worked as a pharmacist with the Kmore Corporation before he ended up joining the University of Arkansas for medical studies as an assistant professor. Now, Dr. Painter is an associate professor at the University of Arkansas for medical studies, where he serves as the director of the Division of Pharmaceutical Evaluation and Policy, as well as the associate director of the Center for Mental Health and Outcomes Research at the VA. Dr. Painter's research projects include HIV translating Institute for Depression into effective solutions, telemedicine outreach for post-traumatic stress disorder, precision medicine and mental health care, and evaluation of primary core integrated pain support. It's a few of the many projects that he has working now. In addition to his numerous research topics, he also serves as course coordinator and or instructor for numerous classes and has served as mentors to 14 PhD and PharmD students. So welcome me and joining Dr. Painter.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the welcome and introduction.
Pleasure. So I'll ask a couple quick questions just to kind of get the ball rolling, then I'll open it up to students if they have any questions. The first is, how would you kind of describe your average day or week at your university? It seems like you have a lot going on, so it seems like a lot to juggle. So why don't you let us know a little bit about what your average week looks like?
Sure. So, you did a good introduction there, and I'll back up a little bit to talk about sort of where I ended up or how I ended up in these positions. When I left UK in 2012, I came to University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences and the Central Arkansas Veterans Healthcare System, and I ended up with a really weird job or jobs. So I have an appointment in the College of Pharmacy where I spend about half of my time, and then a separate appointment, like a completely different job really, over at the VA where I spend the other half of my time. And there ends up being a lot of overlap in sort of the people who I work with, and I do research at both sides and I do mentoring at both sides. But I really kind of have two jobs. And so if you ask sort of what my typical day looks like, it really depends on what day. I looked at a couple of these videos in preparation for talking, and I think that's everyone's answer is like, there is no typical day. Like my day looks very different each time I come in. But if you look at like over the course of a week, what I do, I spend probably over half of my time talking to people about research. So either inside project meetings, working on specific projects, or mentoring junior faculty, mentoring students on projects that they're trying to do. So helping them to get their projects done. I spend probably over half of my time doing that. I spend another maybe 20% of my time teaching. So that is, other types of mentorship with graduate students. It also includes teaching PharmD students, and I have a course, pharmacoepidemiology, that I teach to graduate students. It includes, seminars that we run out of our division. We have a team taught sort of basic research methods course. So spend maybe a day a week doing that, spread over the course of the week. And then the rest of my time is focused on administrative duties, and that's relatively new. So I started both of these jobs back in 2012. I really took on my first administrative role in 2018, and then became director of our division here at UAMS in 2019. And so I spent probably, 25-30% of my time just doing, administrative things. So HR, dealing with like facility issues, all of those types of things. So it's really spread over a wide variety of tasks. It's definitely, I don't know what to expect each day when I come in. There's going to be something new to deal with.
I'll ask one quick follow-up. So that was very clarifying, because looking at your bio and LinkedIn was kind of confusing with the VA and the College of Pharmacy. So how You said they're basically two separate jobs. How did you end up acquiring both those positions? Was it like simultaneously, or did you kind of start one place and then move together? Or...
Yeah, so my job over at the VA, I'm the only person in our group there. So it's called the Center for Mental Health Care and Outcomes Research. I'm the only person in our group who's in the College of Pharmacy. Almost everyone else that I work with over in that group, they have faculty appointments, but they're in College of Medicine and the Department of Psychiatry. Obviously, mental health focused, so that makes sense. It's a really great group to work with. There are other pharmacists in that group, but they're pharmacists with appointments in the College of Medicine. But there are also psychiatrists, psychologists, economists, anthropologists, sociologists are all in this group of about 35 investigators. So it's a really exciting place to work. We get to do a lot of really cool research because we can work with people who have skill sets and perspectives that are like completely different than mine. So it's really cool. So anyway, I found out about that center whenever I came to interview for the job here at the university. So I came, the way these interviews for faculty positions typically work are you're here for 2 or 3 days and you use those 2 days to like meet with a bunch of people across campus. You give a job talk, go to lunch, go to dinner, those types of things. So I had a lunch with people from VA. They were asking me about the work that I was doing, what I was interested in. They were asking me about my dissertation. And we just found out that our research really overlapped a lot. And our interests and sort of what our goals were for research were really aligned. And so I kind of came down here interviewing for one position and came back with 2 positions from that. And so it just was like a really good fit. And yeah, so I've been in both of those positions for 10 years now.
Well, thank you. Well, now I'll open it up to some students if they have any questions about anything. You can just unmute yourself and chime in.
Hi, Dr. Painter. Thank you so much for coming and being here today. My name's Amanda. I'm an IPOP in my 4th year. So I was really excited to see that you were doing this today. So yeah, thanks again. But yeah, so I am really interested that you have this kind of like dual position. And something I'm super passionate about is just like translational research and collaborating with people across all different types of disciplines. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing with your position at the VA. And so I don't know, I find it kind of exciting that something like that is a possibility within academia, that you have like your hands in many different things. So I was wondering, like, do you know if your type of role where you really do have 2 separate roles is common? And do you have any advice for like trying to find something like that, other than, like you said, just trying to talk to people and network and, meet with people when you go for interviews?
Yeah, within VA, it is common. So a lot of the people I work with are in similar positions as me, where they get about half of their time working with the VA and the other half working on the university side. The way VA is set up, so like, a big part of what I do on the research side is try to get grants to do work, right? And on the VA side, you have to have at least 62.5% of your time funded by VA to be a PI on grants. And so I'm actually like in this really weird situation where my halves aren't exactly halves, but I have like 62.5% of my time funded by the VA. And so, that whole system is kind of set up with the assumption that many of the people who are applying for grants within VA are going to also have positions elsewhere, with an academic affiliate. I think there are other government institutions that have similar setups where people have, academic appointments that sort of complement the work that they're doing within government. So if you're interested in that type of work, and I think one of the big advantages, I see this from VA, but I think that this would be true if you were working for CDC or FDA. the research that you're doing is much closer to the people who are being impacted by it often. And so within VA, the research that we're doing is inside this integrated healthcare system where, you know, if we develop an intervention, if we identify a way to implement an intervention, we're actually doing that so that it can be sustained after the study is completed. And so it's great, and you know, it's really rewarding to work in a system like that where you can really see the impact of the work that you're doing on a shorter timeline than maybe the work that is being done, the work that I'm doing, at least on the academic side, where, you know, the funders and the decision makers often have a lot of different incentives, and getting all of those incentives aligned can be really difficult. So anyway, I think talked around your question. I think it is, I think there are opportunities like this out there. I think especially within government, that's where you're going to find a lot of these split appointments between a government institution and an academic affiliate of that institution. And so if you're interested in that, USA Jobs is the place to go. There are a lot of investigator levels, so you're looking for something that's called GS. That's the general scale for pay for government. Like a GS 13 is probably what you're looking for as a graduate of like the POP program. That type of investigator role, they're are always looking for people like that. So that would be my advice to you.
Cool. That's really, really great advice. If you don't mind, I'll ask a follow-up. I know there's some other folks on that want to ask questions too, but I wanted to ask about since you have this appointment with the VA where you said like 62% of your funding comes from there, although that's like not 100% from the VA, like on the flip side, that's a lot less that you need, I would assume, to get from grant funding. Is that true? And was that like part of your decision in accepting this role?
So, you know, coming out of programs like POP, but also pharmaceutical sciences, there are different types of positions that you can go into. So there's hard funded positions and there's soft funded positions. In the College of Pharmacy here at University of Arkansas, our College of Pharmacy, all of our investigator positions so far, at least, are hard funded. And so, you know, regardless of whether I had chosen to go 100% on the university side or split it between VA and the university, you know, there was going to be that, you know, the kind of safety net, I guess. But on the VA side, I mean, there is an expectation, and sort of I'm judged on the grants that I submit and my ability to bring in both PI and co-I funding. And so, you know, it's a hard funded position, but they can ask me to leave anytime, you know, and so you still have to be successful in getting grants, getting publications, working with others, having people be interested in you being a co-investigator on their work. You know, whether you're in a hard funded position or a soft funded position, those expectations are going to be there. I think I will kind of also talk about, you know, whenever, like in the short term, getting that funding is, you know, it can be really important, but also in the long term, over the first 5 years of your position, if you're going into a tenure track position, it's really important in those first 5 years to bring in that money, to bring in PI funding, to work with others as co-I, build those collaborations. I mean, regardless of sort of the type of position that you're in, whether it's soft funded or hard funded, if you're in a tenure track position, you still have to meet all of those P&T expectations, whatever they are for the school you end up at.
Thank you so much. That's super helpful. I'll let other people ask questions, but I have more if we need.
Sure. I see one in the chat. What is the most rewarding part of your daily or weekly work life? What keeps you wanting to go back? On the other hand, are there elements of your work that you do not enjoy as much? So there are two things that, first I'll say I love my job. I enjoy coming to work. I really do. And I have for 10 years. It's a really enjoyable type of work, I think. The most enjoyable part is, I think, mentoring graduate students, like that one-on-one work with graduate students, especially graduate students once they get sort of into the dissertation phase. You often see like tremendous growth over that relatively short period of time from whenever some student enters their dissertation phase to whenever they're, wrapping it up. The growth potential there is just like, well, like the necessity for growth really there is just really, really high. And to watch a student do that again over, a year and a half, 2 years is really, really rewarding. The other thing that I find really rewarding is the, actually doing the research. I spent a lot of time writing research grants. I don't love writing research grants, but I do love doing the research, like leading a team, working with people to answer complicated questions. I find that really rewarding too. On the other hand, are there elements of your work that you do not enjoy as much? So I mentioned, I have gone into this sort of administrative role over the last couple of years. The HR issues can be really difficult. That's something that, over the first 8 years of doing work, you're mostly working, for yourself. You're focused like head down on research that you find really important. You may have research assistants. You definitely are probably working with graduate students, but there aren't a lot of HR issues that come up with that. Once you move into an administrative role, the HR stuff gets much more complicated. Not only like the performance stuff of people that you work with, but hiring, recruiting is really hard. And so those are things that, I enjoy aspects of it, but sometimes they can be frustrating too. So if I had to pick something, that's probably what it would be. Thanks for the question.
I can ask another question. So I really love that your answer was about your favorite thing that you like about your job is about mentoring students, which is, I think, a pretty common answer, I think, even within our faculty here. I guess like my question is like, do you really feel like you have enough time to really like spend on the mentorship side? Because I think I don't know, I guess just for a little bit of context, myself and maybe some other people on the call are sort of deciding like what's the best career path for us. And myself, I have some industry experience, but I'm also really liking being in the academic environment too. So that's kind of where I'm trying to decide between. And my very, very little experience to this point with mentoring a couple of master students here and there, I've really enjoyed. And that would be definitely like a big pro on the academia side for me. But so I'm curious from your perspective, like how much time do you really have to put into that? And does that time start to diminish as you progress in your career too?
I think, I think that the time that you have to commit to it, and I could be wrong, like I haven't experienced an entire career, but I think, it probably goes down and then comes back up as you become like more senior and you're expected to provide that type of service even more. I think right now is a very difficult time to find time for that because expectations are split in so many different directions. And so, yeah, I do struggle with being able to find enough time to devote to that. I think at least you could ask my students and maybe they would tell you something different, but what I try to do is be sure that the time that we do have is like quality time. So no distractions. The student comes prepared to have the conversation that needs to be done during that time period. And so I think, there are a lot of sort of structures that you can put in place to use to get the most out of the time that you have available. But it also has to be a priority for the faculty member to make that time. So to set aside time on your calendar that can't be used for other things, and that your students know that you're going to be there for them at that time of the week. And whether that be like a set time, like, Friday mornings, I'm here for my students, or it be like, I'm telling you, we can set up a 1 hour meeting each week. We'll check in regardless of what's going on. different faculty handle that in different ways, but you know, it has to be a priority to be there for your students.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I mean, even me now, I feel like I have to carve out time for different things. So it makes sense that it probably your time gets more and more valuable every minute of the workday, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious if you don't mind, if we could pivot into some questions about data and the data sources that you use. So if you're in your position at the VA, so you mentioned that like the findings of your research is very like easily applicable to that population that you're targeting. And that's one of the reasons you enjoy it so much. So does that imply that you're using VA data only in your work at the VA?
So my work at the VA, so we have it's the EHR for all of VA. So we have millions of patients and we have access to their EHR data. So it's an incredibly data rich environment. And I do a lot of work using that EHR data. There's also cost data that can be linked, both sort of personnel time, but also patient cost data that can be linked into that EHR data, which is what I focus a lot on. The work that I do sort of focuses on the cost of different types of interventions. And so I use that data a lot, and it's a tremendous resource. Once you get into doing trials, or you're actually developing interventions and collecting data around that, you end up needing to do a lot of primary data collection, where you're, you know, checking whatever the outcome that you're interested in. So we're often interested in the projects that I'm doing, we're interested in pain, or we're interested in depression symptoms. So for pain, I could look in your EHR and I could look at sort of your visual analog scale, what you've said your pain is whenever you're inpatient or whenever you come in for an outpatient stay. There are a lot of limitations of like the validity of that data, the availability of that data. Maybe you don't have an inpatient stay, or your outpatient stays are irregularly spaced. So you run into a lot of issues with that. Whereas if you're doing it in the space of a trial, you can be sure you're asking it and you're collecting it at exactly the times when you need it. And you don't have to just rely on the visual analog scale. You can use like the brief pain inventory, for instance, to get a better measure of a patient's pain. Same thing with depression. Like in the EHR, we're limited to using like depression screener data, which is, there are a lot of problems with trying to kind of get severity of depression from that screener data. But if you're doing it in the context of a study, you can use like an actual depression severity measure and get better information like that. So we use a lot of EHR data. We use it for the things that it's good for, but there are a lot of limitations to it. Even though it's a tremendous resource, there's still a lot of limitations to it. So we have to supplement that, and that's what, you know, the grants are really valuable for, is being able to pay people to collect that data.
I see. So you are also, you're doing like retrospective real world data analyses as well as running trials. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the two pieces of data complement each other really well, and often we're asking really complicated questions, and so you have to have both pieces to do a good job of answering it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, if would you mind just sharing a little bit about like a project where you use real world data and clinical trial data to supplement each other, you know, if you're willing to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jack mentioned this study that I'm a part of, where we're looking at the effect of using pharmacogenetic testing to select mental health medications for patients. This is a huge trial. I'm a really small part of it. Like, we're just doing the cost analysis, but this is like a $12 million trial that was done within VA, that is kind of looking at the effectiveness, looking at outcomes for patients, what if they receive this pharmacogenetic testing to guide the prescriber in selecting their mental health medication versus they don't. We're doing a cost effectiveness analysis, essentially, of that approach. And so we have all of the trial data that was collected. So like I already mentioned it, but one of the most important things is they're collecting this depression severity data at set points. And so we have really good data that we can look at the effectiveness, but then we have to go into the EHR to look at both like the cost of their treatment, so the cost of those medications that were prescribed for them, but also looking out a year or multiple years from when that was prescribed to look at the downstream changes in mental health costs, which includes, their outpatient visits, their inpatient visits, their ER visits, all of those things. So we're using the trial data there to get a sense of effectiveness, and then we're using the EHR data to look at cost over time.
I see. That is very interesting. And then are you also looking at like treatment patterns as well, whether the patient adheres to treatment or persistence or anything like that?
So it's a huge trial, right? I'm a part of what's called the value core. We're looking at sort of the value. We're doing cost effectiveness. We're doing like a Markov model for long-term cost effectiveness, and we're doing a budget impact analysis. There's another group called the effectiveness core or something like that, and they're doing the adherence data. That is all being collected and analyzed. It's just not a part of my group what we're doing.
I see. Okay. I mean, it makes sense, and it can't all be done by one person, so it makes sense. That is very interesting. So I'm curious I'm just taking over this, Jack. I hope that's okay. If anyone is like really annoyed, they can interrupt me. I know Noah might have some more questions too, but I wanted to ask if did you incorporate costs in your dissertation here at UK? Because a lot of us don't. We still don't have really an economics expert in IPOP at this time, which I think is fine, because modeling to costs, if you have a handle on modeling to other things, you can probably model to costs, I think, in my experience. But I'm curious if you have always been really interested in the economic component of things, or is that something you sort of like learned on the job?
Mm-hmm. So my dissertation did involve cost. It was looking at the cost of treatment of fibromyalgia with opioids, essentially, versus other options. And my dissertation committee included Dr. J.S. Butler, he was over, I don't know if he's still there or not. He's over in the Martin School.
Okay.
He's an econometrician, and so I had help with that, a lot of help with that from him. And so, I carried that forward. Like my work has been really focused in cost, other stuff too, especially in the work that I do with others, but sort of the thing that people come to me for is doing cost of either an intervention that's been developed. And some of those are pharmaceuticals, but a lot of it is like behavioral interventions or, interventions to improve adherence, like all of these different types of things. And now over the last 5 years, a lot of my work is focused in the cost of implementing things. And so not just like doing the intervention, but how do we best implement the intervention into a system? And we have a group here called the Center for Implementation Research. There are like world-renowned implementation scholars that are in these groups that I work with here. And so it was just like a thing that this is being done at our institution, and it's being done really well. And I wanted to contribute to that because it was an area they didn't know how to do. And so that's kind of how I ended up there. My sort of career over the last 10 years has sort of slid into that. You were talking about translational research earlier. So has slid from T2, T3 to T3, T4, where we're really looking at how do we get this into healthcare systems, or even I'm doing a project right now that's focused on an early childhood education intervention. And so how do we get it into the early childhood education centers, which is way more complicated than doing it in healthcare. There's just so much less scaffolding that you can kind of put it within. And so there are all these different complications, but that's, again, answered your question by talking around it, but I've always been interested in cost, and my dissertation focused on that.
I see. Okay, that definitely makes sense. And so you were saying that you kind of worked with this Center for Implementation Science. Is that within the VA?
So it's in the College of Pharmacy actually, which
Oh,
is
okay.
it's actually like a joint center that spans the College of Pharmacy and the College of Medicine. But the head of it is in the College of Pharmacy, and he's a sociologist. That's a professor in the College of Pharmacy. He's actually just a few doors down from me. But he and a lot of sort of the thought leaders within this group came over from the VA group that I work in.
Okay.
And so they are another example of people who sort of split their time between the two institutions. But now this center, it's really cool to be within the College of Pharmacy because a lot of their focus is on how to advance pharmacy practice, and for those like advancements and those sort of pushing to the limit of our scope as pharmacists. How do you implement those? Like, how do you actually get people to use pharmacists in that way? And so it's I think, a really valuable type of research to the profession, really, that they're doing. And so I want to be a part of that.
Yeah, that is really cool. So I'm kind of trying to like understand if where's like the line drawn between your work at the VA and then the work at your university, and like how much of it overlaps, and then do you have projects that are much more pharmacy driven that kind of fall more under the university umbrella and less I mean, you know what I mean, like there's some outcomes research that's typically very like pharmacy driven, and then some of the other things you're working on at the VA seems a little bit more like maybe public healthy and like implementation type of thing like that. So I'm wondering, do you have any other projects going on that are a little bit more like pharmacy driven?
Yeah, so the line, I would say the line in between is this focus on the cost of interventions and implementing interventions. And so I do that on the university side, which is more focused on pharmacy, and I do it on the VA side, which is more focused on behavioral health.
Oh, okay.
I kind of see myself as a health services researcher. So that's like a broad umbrella. But the folk like within my division, I think a really good way to think about this is I go to Academy Health, which
Okay.
is the health services research like umbrella organization.
Yeah.
Everyone else in my division, including most of the students, go to ISPOR. And so, they're all much more focused on pharmaceutical outcomes, and I take sort of a broader look at different types of different interventions that includes pharmaceuticals. So, for instance, with this implementation science group over here, we just got, I mean, it's not my R01, but I'm on a team that just got an R01 funded, looking at vaccine hesitancy and how pharmacists can improve or reduce vaccine hesitancy for COVID, but also for other vaccines that are becoming important. And so that's a pharmacy focused, not a pharmaceutical focus, but a pharmacy focused study that we're doing. And I'm again looking at sort of the cost. Like, is it a good, like, pharmacists can do that, right? But is it a good investment of scarce funds to have the pharmacists trying to do that?
Yes. Okay. That definitely makes sense. I really like that you said that you call yourself a health services researcher, because like I don't know what to call myself most of the time. I think a lot of us fall into this because, for me, I'm not a pharmacist. I'm public health background, so I don't really know what to call myself. I usually go with outcomes researcher, but a lot of people don't really know what that means either. So yeah, I'm glad you share that debacle with me. But this is super interesting. Wow. Okay. I don't know if other people have questions. Maybe I should stop for a little bit.
I could ask a general question if nobody else has anything else. To kind of zoom out a little bit, what is it that drew you to go to the academia rather than industry? And was it something you mentioned your thesis focused on fibromyalgia, but with respect to chronic pain, that's obviously stayed part of your work. Was mental health something that, a direction you wanted to go, or did that kind of once you joined University of Arkansas?
Yeah, so I guess early in my PhD program, I went and did like an internship with Procter and Gamble, and at the time, they were working on pregabalin Lyrica for fibromyalgia, where there was a lot of interest in that, which is, so the idea for my dissertation kind of came from the work that I was doing with them at the time. I really enjoyed working in that setting, but and of course, like, I kind of debated whether that's the direction I wanted to go or not. Ultimately, I came back from that internship and, working in an academic setting, the sort of, I don't know, the breadth of what was being thrown at people, the autonomy with which they had to respond to it, those really spoke to me. That's what I wanted to sort of make my career out of, was being able to make those decisions, having that sort of responsibility to, to have good ideas and try and see them through. That I found that really interesting. And that's sort of the path that I wanted to pursue, was going into academia, where I had, a wide variety of different responsibilities, and, was able to sort of forge a path depending on what my interests were.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Can I ask about maybe like what you see in the next 5 to 10 years for your career in the future?
So I became director of our division 2 years ago. And whenever I became director, we were short on faculty. And so, I have a vision for where I want us to go, but we need more people to do it. And so, I think the next 5 years is really going to be sort of putting that vision into place, working with the folks within my division, and some new folks to sort of put that vision into place. So I think that's probably what the next 5 years look like. On the VA side, I have like a grant that is about to get started. That's a trial looking at implementing depression care for veterans with HIV. So it's like veterans being seen in VA HIV clinics. They're often sort of overlooked, unfortunately, for the way that they receive depression care, because VA is really, really good at doing depression care in primary care, but these people don't go to primary care because they go to HIV clinics. And so I'm working on a trial on the VA side. So those are sort of, over the next 5 years, those are the really big things that I'm focused on, is administration on the university side, getting our division moving in the direction that we all want it to move, getting us back up to full strength and hopefully expanding from there. And then on the VA side, really focused on some PI research that I'm doing, along with a bunch of sort of cost-focused studies on that side too. And there's a new question in chat. So do you feel like postdocs are common or necessary for graduating PhDs? Does this vary depending on the career trajectory? So yes, well, I don't know if we're talking about, I'm guessing there are pharmaceutical sciences folks here too for students. And I don't know if that question came from a pharmaceutical science person or a POP person. For POP, it's, we look at, I've been working on hiring, people, junior people. We just hired someone directly out of a PhD program. I think a postdoc is not necessary for all positions, and we don't see a lot of candidates with postdocs on the POP side. On the pharmaceutical sciences side, I think it's exactly the inverse. I think most folks in pharmaceutical sciences are going into a postdoc after they finish up their program. And that I'm speaking to that through the lens of like hiring people in an academic position, that answer may vary depending on if you're wanting to go into a government organization or you're wanting to go into industry. You know, I don't have a good sense of that.
So in terms of like junior faculty members or someone that might be jumping right into a faculty position right out of a PhD program, like you did yourself, I think, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for, like, I guess maybe tips for success if you're perhaps thinking about that transition?
It's going into an academic position.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
right out of a program.
So, you know, one of the biggest adjustments for me, I was handed a course whenever I came, and it's like, you need to develop this course, you're going to provide it next spring. It's like, I don't know how to do that at all. That is not something I learned. I'm like really nervous about teaching a class, and you're wanting me to put a course together. That was, I think, one of the biggest challenges was like learning how to teach. And not only like in the classroom teaching, but sort of doing a course, I think is really hard and something we're not at all prepared for. So that's a big challenge. So like, how do you do that? I think that's something, talk to your mentor now about that. How do they do that? You have this person that you're working with, talk to them about it. It's not something I ever would have thought about, you know, having a conversation about, but learning from them now, I think could be really valuable. And then for teaching, get as much teaching experience as you can while you're in your program. That can help a lot, I think. Once you come into the position, the most important thing, and like one of the biggest challenges, is finding collaborators. And so it's just go talk to everyone. Anyone who will talk to you, go talk to them and try to figure out where you overlap with them. When you're just starting out in a new position, you're going to be saying yes to a lot of things because you're going to be sort of feeling out like, what is my pathway forward? So identify and like reach out to as many people as possible to identify collaborators. And really, whenever you come into your position and before you accept a position, when you're interviewing, talk to them about what types of mentoring they have set up for junior faculty coming in. And then hopefully they have something. And then whenever you come in, lean on those mentors, develop strong relationships with your mentors from the beginning, and use them to help navigate what can be a really complicated set of questions, like who do I want to work with and what do I want to work on?
Kind of on the flip side of that is you mentioned starting somewhere new. You also mentioned that you have a lot of role in the HR and hiring new candidates. You kind of touched on this a little bit with the postdoc, but what are some of the characteristics or things you recommend for, you know, PhD students who want to go into academia to, you know, improve?
Yeah, so have a good sense of what your goals are going forward. So, you know, for a new faculty member, that's often going to be like a K award. And so have an idea of what you want to work on, you know, after your dissertation, or what your dissertation can build into for that next step. And so like some concrete advice, go look at what is required for a K award, and like what goes into the training plan and the research plan for those, and have a sense of like how you would do that. That would be something that, you know, someone who has a plan for the next 3 years, you know, of what they want to do, I think would be someone that would be impressive to me coming out of a program. Other than that, you know, get a diverse set of experiences. So get as much teaching experience as you can get, have sort of a breadth of research experiences, but also have a really deep understanding of the work that you're doing within your dissertation, which you should have, right? You should.
Yes.
But yeah, being able to speak to that, I think, is a really important thing.
Very helpful. Thank you. Do you have any other questions? I have some other ones I can ask if nobody else has them. So this is kind of in the same vein as, what are you looking for in a candidate? But, what is one piece of advice, you would give current graduate students, or which you would have learned, prior to you graduating?
Yeah. So I rushed through graduate school. So I had finished up PharmD training, and then I kind of went through the PhD as quickly as possible. And I look back on that as a mistake now. I mean, it was good to have finished up and had been able to move on to the next phase, but I think I didn't take advantage of all the things that are there for graduate students. You have like all these courses and all this mentorship that is right there for you. And the students who really like lean into that and work really closely with their mentors, develop those relationships, take like more courses than necessary to develop like a breadth of expertise. That's my advice for graduate students. And whenever I'm advising graduate students, in my program, I kind of say the same thing. It's like, yeah, like you could be done, like you don't have to do these courses, but I think this would be really helpful to you. Like these are skills that are going to be helpful to you going forward. I think you need to learn these things, and it's there. You're never going to have this much time to devote to like improving yourself again, and so use it. Like lean into graduate school. Do it. Really do graduate school.
That's great advice. I appreciate that. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? A minute or two. Well, if not, can we all join in thanking Dr. Painter for taking time to join us today and sharing some great advice with us. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. And, if you have any other questions or, didn't feel comfortable putting a question out in front of people, Jack has my email, or you can look me up on the UAMS website. Send me an email. I'd be happy to talk, about whatever it is going on with you.
Thank you again. And thank you everybody for joining.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.